The Spin-off Podcast Network.
Are you making the most of your KiwiSaver investment? Generate is an award-winning KiwiSaver provider with a track record of strong long-term performance. Making a smart decision now could add tens of thousands of dollars by the time you reach retirement. Book a no-obligation chat with a Generate KiwiSaver advisor today at generatekiwisaver.co.nz/get-advice. A copy of the product disclosure statement is available at generatekiwisaver.co.nz. The issuer of the scheme is Generate Investment Management Limited, and of course, past performance does not guarantee future returns.
I'm Toby Manhire, and this is Juggernaut, the story of the Fourth Labour government. A podcast in 6 parts.
Doesn't give my opponents much time to run up to an election, does it?
This nation is at risk.
What do you think you're up to now, you perverted little liar?
I could smell the uranium on it as you lean towards the
most radical overhaul in the history of New Zealand's administration.
Juggernaut, the story of the Fourth Labour government. Made with the support of New Zealand On Air. Listen now on the Spin-off or wherever you get your podcasts. Kia ora tātou, and welcome to Gone by Lunchtime, the last Gone by Lunchtime of the year 2018, with many merry thank yous to Flick, who have come on board as the sponsor of the politics section, and we love them dearly, and strongly encourage you to go to any post in the politics section, have a click on the Flick ad, and look at the deal they can offer you. Speaking of deals, Ben Thomas, what a deal you have for us today.
Quite a big deal.
You have passed your restricted license.
What?
A round of applause in the pod. Also from Tina Tiller over there, who I should say thank you to.
In tender middle age, I smoked the asses of all the 16 and 17-year-olds sitting the same restricted license test today. A dwindling number, a dying breed, adult non-drivers. You know, now that I've flown the coupe, now that I've driven off at high speed, but within like a safe road speed. Who was some other? Steve Braunius was an adult non-driver.
Has he done that? Did he pass his test?
Yeah, he wrote a piece for the Herald about learning to drive via Shane Carter of Dimmer and Straight Jacket Fits. So Steve Braunius has definitely driven a car. We don't know whether he can drive yet. Martin Bomber Bradbury, another adult non-driver.
Oh, shout out to Martin Bomber Bradbury.
My good friend Wallace Chapman.
Yeah.
Wallace Chapman can't drive.
He's New Zealand's most famed and beloved adult non-driver.
Most beautiful non-driver, Carol Hirschfeld.
Carol Hirschfeld.
Yeah.
Yeah. Who's the other one? The other prominent one. James Shaw, of course, from the Greens. He was an adult non-driver until recently. I think he learned to drive during the election year.
Wow.
Now, I've heard from Green volunteers who were sort of charged with kind of driving him around, on the campaign trail. So
You mean cycling him around,
but
like doubling for?
Yeah, and it's sad. I'll miss all of my adult non-driver friends. We used to catch up on the bus. That's literally true. The last time I saw Wallace Chapman, we were on the bus together and talking about our plans to escape the Link bus route.
It's not illegal to catch the bus when you have a driver's license, I should point out.
Look, I've got a lot of emissions in the bank. I've earned this.
There was that. What's that apocryphal Margaret Thatcher quote? Do you know the one? No. A man who is over the age of 25 and catching the bus should be ashamed of himself. It's not that. Please let us know, listeners, what it is, in fact. And it's apocryphal anyway. How are you, Annabelle?
I'm good. Excited to be here for our third and final podcast of the year.
Hey, we've done them quite regularly.
Have we?
That's libelous.
We did a fourth one without you when Jamie Lee Ross was.
There you go. Sorry.
It's definitely quarterly on average.
That's not fair and not true. It's been entirely regular. And for this final podcast of the year, we are going to address all the pressing issues that I can't read my own handwriting. Trevor Mallard, let's start with him. He is under pressure this week from a range of quarters. There was a column by Audrey Young, the New Zealand Herald political editor, in which she, right off the bat, said he has inbuilt bias, I think words to that effect. But this followed walkout in the House in question time after. What did Simon Bridges, leader of the National Party, say?
Here comes the protection.
Here comes the protection. That's right.
So he had accused Jacinda Ardern, who was being a bit evasive or he felt was being a bit evasive with her answers over the Carol Sroubek affair. He accused her of ducking and diving. Trevor Mallard, the Speaker, got to his feet to make some kind of ruling or comment, and Bridges muttered under his breath or sort of said, here comes the protection, which is not, you can't say that. You can't say that the Speaker is taking sides. Trevor Mallard is clearly taking sides. Trevor Mallard does have a soft spot for Jacinda Ardern. He's got, and now I guess we could be held in contempt of Parliament for this, but it is true that there are a lot of people in New Zealand's political left who have an almost paternalistic kind of regard for the Prime Minister's safety, which is unnecessary because she's by far the strongest performer they've had in that Labour Party leadership role for a long time, definitely since Helen Clark. But there is this tendency, I think, for many of them to sort of rush to her defence, which, again, she doesn't need. And I think what you see, with good speakers of the House, Lockwood Smith was one under the previous National Government, it tends to be if they feel a bit of a sense of aggrievement towards their party leader who's the Prime Minister. Lockwood Smith didn't get the cabinet position he wanted and instead probably he felt got shunted off into being the Speaker. And so he didn't have this kind of same regard for John Key's well-being in the House. And he was quite strict, he was quite down the line. If Trevor Mallard had been the Speaker under a entirely hypothetical Andrew Little, David Shearer, David Cunliffe administration, I think he would have been a much better Speaker because he wouldn't have felt that kind of personal.
Is he being paternalistic? Is that what you're sort of suggesting? Mollycoddling. Annabelle?
Well, to be fair, my understanding wasn't it like the 12th supplementary question? So I don't know if it was necessarily about protecting her, but more like out of frustration that they just kept going and going and going and going and going down that line of questioning. That was my understanding, that it wasn't like the first question he got up and asked. It was like the end of a long line of supplementaries and
I saw some commentary.
Mallard lost his rag.
I saw some commentary on Twitter to that effect, and there is this strange narrative that's developing amongst some people that the opposition are kind of getting a bit above their station by questioning the government. And the 12th supplementary. Well, if you don't have answers, you'll probably need to ask a 13th. I mean, that's why we have question time. That's why you have supplementaries, because you get these primary questions, which are on notice. The government gets them at 10 a.m. They have 4 hours to draft their answers, which cleverly avoid admitting any fault or guilt or giving away any information that they don't want to. And then the opposition has to weasel out the real answers with supplementaries and by getting the ministers to think on their feet. Now, if you're putting yourself in a position where you're getting a 12th supplementary because it doesn't seem like you've answered the question there and you haven't shut down that line of attack, it's not the Speaker's role to then step in and say, whoa, that's enough.
Well, it would depend on the question, wasn't it? So what was the question, Ben?
It's all just
something about ducking and diving, wasn't it?
It's all about. Yeah. It's one of those who knows
was it a question that was asked in order to seek new information that had been unavailable up to that point, or was it more just like
but that's
banging on about something that perhaps?
Questions can be either in order or out of order. So if they're not relevant, if they're not based in fact, the Speaker can rule them out of order. He didn't rule Bridges' question out of order. When Bridges then accused the Prime Minister of ducking and diving, which, could be a line ball call, then he sort of got to his feet, and that's when Bridges made the really offending remark. But it's not right to say that the opposition is overstepping the mark by continuing to ask the government questions if it hasn't got answers, and that doesn't matter who's in opposition or who's in government. And we see this again with these written parliamentary questions. Now, I wrote a pretty critical article on the spin-off last year, about the 6,000 written questions that National had lodged, because I don't think it's a good use of anyone's time to just spam up the system. On the other hand, Claire Curran resigned because she lied in those answers to written questions. Now, and I've seen this commentary develop that actually
lied is probably overstating it, but anyway, there was
she omitted answers, and then. Honest opinion. No. But this idea that by continuing to ask questions, National are just being pests or nuisances. Well, they've already exposed a couple of ministers that way, and again, I actually think this comes down to paternalism. The Prime Minister has to answer questions. In the UK, the Prime Minister doesn't have any questions on notice, and they do 2 hours on their feet. Just answering any question about anything to do with the government. It's not asking too much of the government to answer questions.
I totally agree. I mean, I think it's absolutely the opposition's job to ask important and pertinent questions. I just find it deeply ironic when National were so dismissive of the media when we sought questions and when we would lodge OIAs. So in my mind, there's a level of hypocrisy there that's pretty hard to stomach.
Still on Trevor Mallard.
By the way, Paula Bennett, you're still welcome to come on the Hui next year, season 3, fingers crossed.
You're still holding former ministers to account. Invitations are open.
One of the reasons that Mallard is viewed so negatively by the National Party is this new system that he brought in at the beginning of the Parliament, which I believe had all the best of intentions behind it, which was that if the government behaves badly and doesn't answer a question or acts rudely, he will give the opposition more supplementary questions to ask. And if the opposition behaves badly in the House or trifles with the House, he'll take away their supplementary questions. And he says that over time it about evens out. But it does have a much more negative effect on the opposition because, you craft your question line in advance to get to those answers that you want. So having questions taken away from you is much more of a harm than it is a benefit to get a couple more supplementary questions. And so National see that this is, it's not so much that it's applied unevenly, it's that it's applied seemingly arbitrarily. Sometimes the Speaker will take away 6 supplementary questions, but then he'll almost seem ridden by guilt, and then he'll give back 6 supplementary questions 3 questions later. And this is sort of like going into an exam, being told you've got 3 hours, then at the halfway mark you get told actually it's stopping in half an hour, so then you start scribbling your answers, and then they say actually we'll give you another hour. And so it really messes with your planning and isn't conducive to. And
the whole thing just has the vibe of a parent dealing with a couple of unruly children, talking about pocket money. I'll give you more pocket money. I'm taking some pocket money. I'm going to put it back on. In the end, it just kind of loses all. It just sort of seems a bit random and all over the shop to me after a while.
Loses the mana of the role, doesn't it? Diminishes the mana.
Bring back Lockwood Smith. He was great. I mean, he was at his best a real thorn in the side of Key and his ministers because he demanded that questions be answered rather than
not be
addressed, which is what it went back to under Carter. And he was brilliant, I think. The other point about the other reason that Mallard has been in the news is because he has commissioned an independent inquiry into bullying and harassment in Parliament, which has had a lot of people raising their eyebrows at some of the more kind of pugilistic tendencies of Trevor Mallard himself over the years in Parliament, but also immediately had some news currency in the form of former staffers going to the New Zealand Herald, I think, initially, about the leadership approach of leading New Zealand celebrity gardener Maggie Barry. Maggie Barry. And, what do you make of all that?
MAGA is just trying to make Aotearoa great again, and everybody just needs to get on board.
All right. I hadn't seen MAG.
Like, suck it up.
Wow. Incredible. It's a tricky one, isn't it, Ben? Because, to be honest, I think it would be horrible working for Maggie Barry, the sort of general, but in terms of the specifics of it, you kind of think, like, for example, she was trash talking crumpet of afternoon radio Jesse Mulligan. And, like, of course, they all got to trash talk people like us, right? Of course, that's part of it. Some of it, it's hard to pin down into terms of exactly what the allegations are, don't it?
It's very hard to describe bullying accurately a lot of the time, in literal terms.
Yes.
It's difficult to describe the atmosphere, the feelings involved, at the time. And I think that's right. A lot of the detail that came out with more secret tapes was actually just banal stuff. A minister bitching to her staff member about some negative media coverage is not a news story. It's not a scandal. She referred to one staffer as, she said, you've got to shave off that 70s moustache, and then said to a room full of superannuitants, you can collect your brochures off the man dressed like the Great Gatsby at the back of the room. And I mean, I have to admit, when I read that, I thought it was pretty funny. I was like, Maggie Barry.
But exactly, like a person with a good sense of humour that you respect. And it's fine.
But it's very different. Yeah,
it's absolutely different. I completely disagree with you, Ben. Like, it might seem funny when you're reading about it in the paper, but if you're someone who's being routinely humiliated by someone in a position of power in front of your workmates, it's not okay. I've worked in environments where there's been awful workplace bullying going on, and I really dislike the way it's couched as, I don't know, like, is it really bullying? It's a tough environment and la la la. It's actually, workplace bullying is very easy to define, and I think anything that any investigation into workplace bullying in any workplace has got to be a good thing.
Yeah, look, I don't disagree with that. I think what I mean is it's hard to read words on the page and then conclude from those that there was bullying, and that's why part of the problem here is that I think those claims weren't looked at as bullying, because Parliament has these breakdown of relationship clauses, which are basically a no-fault sort of no personal grievance. You get a payout which is reasonably significant compared to private sector redundancies, and it's sort of a no-fault. We just agree to part ways, and so it does become quite parliamentary services, unless they're forced to, won't look into, was this just a case of incompatibility or was this a case of bullying? Most of the time they'll just say, let's just agree to part ways, amicably or at least not hostilely. Where there has been, for instance, one of the staffers hasn't spoken, and that was apparently, where there was a bullying allegation. Now, maybe that means there was a settlement. We don't know. And, in terms of the wider thing, I think that's a good point that you brought up, in terms of, the claims Parliament's a robust environment. It is a very different environment from other workplaces, in the sense that you're not responsible to shareholders or the constitution of the company or the CEO. You're responsible to the people of New Zealand. So if Maggie Barry, if any MP is a workplace bully, you can't fire them for that, right? The only people who can fire them are the people of New Zealand. Now, there's been a couple of suggestions about how you could kind of try and improve the behaviour, because a lot of it's not even bullying. A lot of it is just that a lot of MPs and ministers aren't great bosses, and they're bad at managing people. And so some of the ideas that have been floated are make all the MPs responsible for their own staffing budgets. So if they start getting personal grievances, they just run out of money and they can't afford to hire more staff. I don't know if that's the solution, but
I think one of the things that makes Parliament unique too is bullying is actually valued and celebrated. So when you have someone that can go in and rip the other party to shreds and, getting scalps and all of that. It's something that we talk about a lot. Like, actually being a bully is considered a good thing. And I do think that parliamentary services needs to do a better job, because we've talked a lot in the past about, rumours that we've heard different MPs and ministers who treat their staff poorly, and it's just not okay. We shouldn't accept it. We shouldn't accept that that it's okay and that it's good enough.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely true, and I do think, though, that sometimes it overshoots a little. So, allegations that Maggie Barry yelled or swore or called someone a bad name behind their back, in a private conversation. I mean, it is this high stress environment, and I think you find any environment which is high stress, newsrooms, the police, hospitals, people do develop...
Driving instructors.
Yeah, so sometimes people develop, darker senses of humour, or they let off steam, and so, we can't be quite as, it's not quite the same as McDonald's where, if you're kind of swearing and yelling, by definition, there's bullying taking place. And that does make it hard, to do a big overview.
The other part of that story that was interesting is where the information's coming from. And there was, for example, we don't know the provenance precisely of the Maggie Barry staffer material, but there was a leak of the talking points, among other things, that ministers had been, members of the National Caucus had been provided with in responding to bullying allegations. And it does, each one of those adds to the sense that perhaps there isn't the sweetness and light in the National Party post Jamie Lee Ross that we were encouraged to believe.
The National Party is leaking more than all the homes built in Auckland in the 90s. There's no two ways about it. You cannot say that like that email that got sent out, giving MPs lines that they can use and talking about the strong National Party culture. The National Party culture is absolutely strong, and the culture is leak.
Yeah, I mean, that's right. Because there's nothing sensational about what was in that document. Those talking points, on any issue of the day get sent around, 4 or 5 times a day or something. And, it probably would have been quite controversial if, the lines had been, there had been an instruction, don't under any circumstances tell the media about all the bullying.
Don't let them know about the bullying.
Yeah, like in italics, not for publication.
The incident.
We are working on the bullying.
Great incident.
Yeah. That's right. The mere fact that things are just flowing out now it's a bad sign for them.
Squirting.
With
They're not leaking, they're squirting.
The overexcited National Party caucus is just, and look, whether it's a concerted Barry Soper had an interesting column in, I think it was his radio thing, but put on the Herald website, talking about, how they're getting anonymous texts from people claiming to be MPs, giving them all sorts of details, not just leaked documents. So if that's the case, look, it does look like there's a concerted effort by at least one person to undermine Simon Bridges. Now, I wouldn't have thought that the Jamie Lee Ross saga was the best template for anyone to use to undermine their leader, but look, these, it only takes one person to really derail a party.
Well, we also
Does it then mean that Jamie might have been telling the truth when he said that he wasn't the original leaker?
Squirter.
I mean,
Squirter.
It may mean that, they forgot to take Jamie Lee Ross at Parliament off the mailing list.
Well, they did. I mean, with Jamie Lee Ross's...
It can be hard to manage those Excel spreadsheets.
Jamie Lee Ross's voice recordings and now the Maggie Barry secret recordings, we can congratulate the National Party on their embrace of radical transparency in politics.
They should all just wear body cameras.
or walk around with GoPros poking out the top of their heads. Hi, what were you going to tell me about the secret briefing? Iain Lees-Galloway sort of ended up after the longer than 3 weeks promised with the review of his decision, the ruling on, you pronounce beautifully the Czech kickboxer's name. Would you like to do it again? Karel Sroubek? Sroubek. Is
that right?
Is it
I've just read it in newspapers. I'm probably saying it totally wrong.
You make it sound delicious.
Like homeschool kids who read Russian novels and then try and use the words in conversation.
You just said, Annabelle, I'd just like to say that you said that he made it sound delicious.
Yeah, like a biscuity pastry with like jammy kind of.
Right, sort of a flaky sort of number with a
very
little bit
buttery and flaky, light.
And that you get from a kind of very high-end deli.
Yes,
you have to drive across town to get yourself a Karel Sroubek. Half dozen, please. Iain Lees-Galloway made the case that while he did have some regrets, I think, did he have some regrets? Or at least he had apologised to the Prime Minister, and perhaps he might have asked more questions, I think was the way he framed it. But he hadn't used Google as much as Simon Bridges would have liked him to, and essentially there was the information, some of the crucial information about Interpol knowing about Karol Sroubek's past and his criminal record in Czech Republic was sort of there, but not in the right place in the report, and
he's
shaping
up to be as flaky as the aforementioned pastry, really, isn't he?
Nice. I'll have an Iain Lees-Galloway. Yeah. We don't sell them anymore.
Ultimately, I think he had a reasonable explanation for it, which was he wasn't asked to make he wasn't asked to make a decision about the previous convictions in the Czech Republic. He wasn't, the officials didn't alert him to the fact that could mean Sroubek gets out of the country. He was asked about the most recent conviction. He took into account the other stuff. It's a new minister problem. Once he's been in for a few years, you'd expect that he was sort of asking more critical questions. He was, things would raise red flags. But in this case, and there was a process issue, which is, the detail about him, Sroubek, returning to the Czech Republic was not in the file because that was in a case where he got off, he was discharged. Yep. Yeah. So that seems like an actual process issue where the officials probably could have cast their net wider. Look, it's untidy. It does give him a bit of, feet of clay rep for a while, but overall, he's got important work to do for the government. He's their workplace relations minister. They've got, reforms that are very key to their union bases going through there. He really is, bizarre as it may seem, given the aftermath of the Sroubek stuff, he's one of the more competent ministers in this cabinet. If they, when Claire Curran left, the average competence of the cabinet went up. If Lees-Galloway left, it would go down, and that's the real reason that he's not going anywhere.
The thing is that it just plays so beautifully into National's narrative about Labour, which is that they're going to be a bunch of soft touches that will let criminals run rife and do like a half-assed, flaky job. And he's just this whole situation epitomises that narrative perfectly, and it's the gift that keeps on giving, because every week or two there's something else that crops up. So if he's like one of the best performers they've got, then they're gonna have an interesting term, aren't they?
He feels like he's on a kind of, last warning might be overstating it, but the fact that he said he had apologised to the Prime Minister and that had been accepted felt kind of pointed to me in a way, because he was sort of trying to say, no, I didn't really do anything wrong, but I could have done more, and I've apologised to the Prime Minister, because she was left for a while there doing all that read between the lines stuff and kind of trying very hard to answer questions that she didn't necessarily have the answers to.
Yeah, and ultimately the only test of whether, you can't take a personal grievance if you're sacked as a minister. Ultimately, the only question is, does the Prime Minister have confidence in you? And they can lose confidence in you for a couple of reasons. One is that you're doing a terrible job, but the main reason a Prime Minister loses confidence in you is you make them look stupid. And so I think it was very important that he sort of made those amends to the PM.
Annabelle Lee has an important function to attend, so we're going to razz through the rest of it. Should we talk really quickly about Whānau Ora? The latest story there is that one of the agencies that was doing some work for them ended up with a surplus, and they went, that's nice, we'll keep that. Is that what happened?
Yeah, $600,000 they paid it out as a dividend to their private shareholder, which is NUMA, which was an organisation, National Urban Māori Authority, that
closely aligned with Willie Jackson, the Minister of Employment,
and John Tamihere, and the Whānau Ora provider or agency was Te Pou Matakana, which was associated with Tariana Turia. Her son is also a board member on it. And CEO is John Tamihere. As CEO is Meripekaro Kawatate. It's a terrible look. You cannot be thumping your chest day in, day out saying that Whānau Ora is being underfunded while pulling a $600,000 profit. It's just not just not a good look.
And this,
at
I
all.
mean, I assume that Winston Peters must have been all over this. He would have. He loved stories about whanaora, appearance of dodginess. I'm sure he would have hammering the government on this one. Was he? I didn't see. Was he hammering them?
They appeared before the Māori Affairs Select Committee yesterday, and it came up alongside with a massive $5 million underspend at TPK. I haven't seen what Koro Winston has to say about it yet, but there was an interview by the excellent Mikey Sherman last night speaking to Penny Henare about how he's going to call them to task. Whether or not he actually does, who knows? But certainly it diminishes their mana in terms of calling for more funding for Vote Māori and for whānau order when taxpayer money can be used. It can be paid out as a $600,000 profit.
Because whānau order does have this slightly odd structure, which is that the government, through Te Puni Kōkiri, gives money to these 3 commissioning agencies, which are not government organisations. And then those 3 commissioning agencies, contract the actual whānau order providers, on a case-by-case, program-by-program basis. And, I would have thought, at a program-by-program basis, it's probably fine for a provider to say, we'll get this many kids immunised, we'll help this many people into homes, and then they can keep whatever's left over as long as they're delivering on that. That creates efficiencies, standard kind of free market sort of stuff. The position of the commissioning agencies is a little less clear. Should they be paying a dividend? Should they be keeping any of the money that over the top, or is their responsibility just to spend this budget? And get $600,000 worth of more services from another program, and I think it's less clear cut. And
Michelle Hippolyte said that so long as they complete the requirements and that will deliver the requirements of their contract, they're free to do what they want with any.
Yeah, and with a normal contractor, I think that's probably a defensible position. And I think it's a little less clear with these commissioning agencies because they
agree.
Have this strange quasi but not quite government role.
And I think, it comes back to why it was set up that way in the first place. And, the criticism has been made that it was about, creating a enterprise for the Māori elite. So
let's, before you Scarpa, Annabelle, let's do the thing that with the only people with this really original idea of saying who the political winners of the year are.
Oh shit! What a good idea.
Yeah, thanks.
Cool.
This is the one. This is the determinative one.
I'm going to go first, just because I don't know if you guys have thought of whose yours is yet, and do something which isn't spectacularly original, but to say that Andrew Little has had a kind of pretty amazing year with this massive bag of portfolios, Pike River being one of them, having set in motion the Criminal Justice Review. He's also got treaty negotiations. I guess we have to wait and see whether or not how he's getting on with Ngāpuhi and stuff. Annabelle's making a very unimpressed face. But it's just an interesting kind of story as well, given what happened to him in the immediate run-up to the election, you could sort of have forgiven him for wanting to go and hide somewhere for a year and just sort of get his bearings back, but he has been certainly probably the busiest, I would say, one of the very busiest cabinet ministers. Who wants to get next?
Speaking of treaty settlements, I'd like to acknowledge Chris Finlayson for his amazing mahi in the treaty settlement space. I know that people within Ngāpuhi really miss his input and his nuanced understanding of Te Ao Māori and the work that OTS did too. I understand there's been, a bit of a changing of the guards there. So I'd like to mahi to him. He also was the lawyer for my iwi's treaty settlement, and even though there was disagreements over it at the time, Ngai Tahu, he did a pretty stellar job over there, so I'd like to mahi him. In terms of the opposition, can I shout out to my cousin Nuk Korako? I actually think that he's been doing a really good job keeping the Labour's Labour's Māori caucus to account, asking good questions and challenging. But I think the stellar performer in terms of New Zealand politics this year has to be Niamh. No one's done more than Niamh. No one has done more than Niamh.
It's fair. It's a fair point. I mean, she's been ducking and diving on the Carol Sroubek bit, hasn't she?
Niamh has been preparing her whole life for this job.
Ben.
It's probably too obvious, but the Prime Minister, Labour's overtaken National in the polls, at least sort of 50% of the time. The government's held together, not a foregone conclusion when you've got Labour, the Greens and New Zealand first. She's become an international icon. People travelling overseas are often, hit up about our wonderful Prime Minister. She's done a reasonably good job. Part of the reason that I think that she would be, still the outstanding figure is that over the last year we haven't actually seen many of the government's big programs actually really take off. We don't know enough about Kiwi Bill to know whether it's succeeding or not. We don't know enough about, for instance, the Ngāpuhi negotiations to know whether it's happening. The mental health inquiry has just reported back, and there's another working group set up to respond to the working group before anyone will ever actually make a fucking decision. And so it's, we're still early days. So I think the Prime Minister, for keeping it all together, is probably the outstanding performer. On the trends, though, if just did a bit of maths.
You mean on the trends?
On the trends. So this is in absolute terms. The Prime Minister has had the best year. But on the trend line, by mid-2019, Chris Farfoy will hold 75% of the portfolios in Cabinet.
He'll still be outside Cabinet.
He will still be outside of Cabinet. by election year 2020, he'll be Finance Minister and Governor General. Look, Farfoy is a pretty... he's a pretty good role model for a lot of politicians.
Yeah.
He wasn't marked for greatness. He's done a very competent, solid job by applying himself to not particularly interesting portfolios. He's been a safe pair of hands, and now he's regarded as, an almost stellar performer in this government. So, Farfoy is probably number two.
Yep, well done, Chris Farfoy. Yep, well
pick.
done. Look, that's a good point to end it on. We were going to talk about Santa, but we'll talk about him in January instead. What's your take on Santa? Do you want to do it now, Annabelle? What was your take on Santa?
Apparently, I've become like the media consultant for Māori Santa.
Yeah.
Just fighting with all
You're at the pay of Māori Santa.
The crackers out there who are so deeply offended by a brown man being Santa. Get a life, people.
What was your line, though? Tell us, because you had a very good line on this.
What did I say?
It's about Tony Fo.
Shout out to all the old white guys out there who roll their eyes when Māori talk about things like taniwha and wahi tapu, but lose their shit when somebody transgresses the tapu nature of
their made-up hero.
Of their imaginary friend, Santa Claus.
Very good.
Hashtag Christmas crackers. Only a few people got that. Only a few people got the hashtag.
Tune in next year to Gone By Lunchtime, where we'll read out more of our favourite tweets and engage in robust exchange without ever resorting to bullying. Thank you very much, Tina. Thank you very much, Annabelle. Thank you, Ben.
Thanks, Uncle.
We'll be back in 2019. Squirties against the Flakies.
Yeah.
Which team are you on? Kia ora.
Talofa lover, I'm Madeline Chapman, editor at The Spinoff. If you have the means, consider supporting our high-quality journalism by becoming a Spinoff member. Sign up now at thespinoff.co.nz/donate.
Kia ora, I'm Duncan Grieve, founder of The Spinoff. You can help us keep all of The Spinoff's award-winning journalism free for everybody by becoming a member today at thespinoff.co.nz/donate.
The Spinoff Podcast Network.